perfect solution, our viewers can also see how they can apply this in their own areas.
Definitely. Yeah, this topic can get me going even into the night, but we'll keep it as bite-sized but practical as possible. So one way that I commonly think about it is basically three main components of systems. It was a framework that was that basically, after speaking to many different kind of solutions and systems out there, we realized that these three main areas, these three main components resonates across almost every system, right? So the first part is really the systems of records, right? How do we build a pipeline to continuously collect and store information around our users? This information can be, the email addresses of these users, what emails did these users engage on? What were they looking on your platform? I think these are just records, raw records that you're collecting out of these users. That's definitely a starting point to understanding your users, right? The second system that we think about is the systems of intelligence, right? How do we value add to the kind of raw data that we earlier mentioned? How do we value add to this data, make more sense out of it, and understand our users a little bit better, right? The final system, the third system that we have is within our stack is the systems of engagement, right? So now that you have already collected all your raw records of all your users, you are making sense of it, transforming the data in certain ways to understand the users better. Finally is to activate on it, to operationalize it, to use it to orchestrate and personalize the communications to our users, right? So maybe layering kind of like an example, a simple example where it involves all three systems, right? One common e-commerce use case that probably our team that speaks of day in and out is cart abandonment campaigns, which simply means when a user adds something to their cart, shows a certain level of intent to purchase, but dropped off due to whatever reasons, right? So starting from the systems of record, we need to make sure that we need to collect the emails of these users or any device IDs for these users, what these users' names are, what did they abandon, what did they add to their cart, what kind of actions they were taking, how many times did they add to their cart, right? So these are, you may think about it as raw records. The second system, which is the system of intelligence, aims to enhance your data, which is, for example, we start asking questions. How strong is the intent of this user when this user has abandoned a cart? Because a user who adds one item and decides not to purchase versus a user who does this throughout the day, who added multiple items and kept it within their cart and revisit their cart over time, right? That personifies two very different kind of users and it indicates very different level of intent. On top of that, what are attributes around these users? Could this user have been a churn user? Do we have then this opportunity, this window to reactivate this user, to serve this user and nudge him towards making this purchase a little bit better, right? And then finally, we have the systems of engagement. So now we have the cart abandonment, we got this user, we got his contact details, we have whatever items that he has added to his cart, and we know that he's a churn user. Finally, let's say, okay, so this user has very high intent of purchasing, maybe like a Nike shoe. Okay, let's engage this user by personalizing a few items around Nike products, maybe around the category of shoes. Let's make sure that we retarget this user within a very short time frame, right? Maybe it's a live triggered campaign so that we can address that user's intent in that micro moment of that user's journey. So I think it's a very linear use case, and scaling that up to the many other touch points of our user's journey that's where we can kind of categorize where which part of the pipeline does it lie within each of these three systems.
Yeah, and I think just to add, right, why this is so relevant, because if we do not kind of have a clear approach in terms of thinking about where is our maturity in each of these areas, the systems of record, intelligence, and engagement, it'd be very hard to pinpoint how you need to evolve or where the current bottlenecks are. I think that, of course, in future, as things get more complex, you may have more. We have seen other systems such as a system of decisioning, just as an example. And I think that these are things whereby essentially it helps you bucket and see, all right, in order to capture these opportunities, this is what we need to do. And if you want to, during a, say, key sale event, you want to make sure that for your customer, you deliver the most relevant message. You got to make sure that there is that high level of hygiene in your system of records. You have the right information. And then in terms of the system of intelligence, like the speed at which things flow in terms of from the data all the way to the action of the customer, these are all things that you kind of need to have a good grasp around, which is where you can then prioritize, all right, this is the area by which I need to focus more upon in order to ensure that, okay, during the key event or during a shopping season, this is the one thing that I want to deliver, the right message at the right time to the right customer, or the best deal to all our customers so that they are aware, or the usage of specific features. I think that these are things which, as a whole, it's a very complex problem. But when you break it down, it becomes super clear. All right, these are the areas you need to evolve.
Yeah. So I think one way to approach it is to really think about it. Don't think about it from a tech perspective, right? I mean, you start thinking about, okay, your data pipelines, is it built off of RDBMS kind of structure, or is it some live streaming structure? Once you start thinking from there, I think what you're missing is eventually the customer view, right? So for us, I think what really works well is starting from the customer use cases first, right? Because the way at least for my own workflow, it's over a number of years, 3 to 4 years, where I've collated many use cases that we want to serve our customers better, but wasn't able to because of certain tech constraints, right? Maybe certain gaps in our engagement stack, right? Starting from each of these use cases, I would deconstruct them, right? Like, okay, so what's missing? Maybe it's a live streaming architecture that I'm missing. Maybe, in my systems of intelligence, it's not able to act on live data, right? So over time, I think once you start blueprinting each of these use cases and start understanding why it's hard to implement, you'll slowly identify, where the gaps are within each of these three systems. And that's where you know that if it comes to like a MarTech enhancement or transformation that your organization is doing, that's where you know where to focus your search, your discovery starting from, right? So one example for us, for example, is we knew that we were not able to adapt fast enough to the mobile kind of environment where users come and go from the app very quickly. They probably would not have ZALORA in their mind for within the same day. After they go to sleep, and then when they wake up, they wouldn't be thinking about ZALORA anymore, right? So how do we really be able to, in a live basis, understand the user's intent, act upon it really quickly? Yeah, and that was one use case for us. That was one missing piece of our architecture. And from there, I think that deconstruction happened, and eventually, we enhance our engagement stack to the next paradigm, to the next level. So
yeah, I think from there, I think it's a very great segue into the next component that we want to talk about, which is really having the right mechanisms and levers. Because like what you just mentioned exactly is that, you can have, the systems, but if you do not have a direction you're driving it towards, right, then, it becomes like you may be designing a perfect system without the right kind of like focus or use cases. And in an environment where we need to cut through the noise, that's super important to think about this so-called strategic pillar around what are the kind of mechanisms and levers that you need to enable this right message, right time, right customer approach. So I think Jarrett, right, you also have experience with this, and because the problem is so broad, what are some ways, or rather how would you bucket the different components, right? Because it can become super sophisticated, it can be straightforward. How would you then therefore bucket these kind of ideas? And what's then one practical way that we've approached this? And even from there, I can even chip in ideas if we come up with something on the fly.
Yeah. So the 4 Rs are probably like the biggest topic of the industry today when it comes to customer engagement, right? Having the right message at the right time for the right person on the right channel. And whatever that we just mentioned earlier, right? In terms of the three systems, so on and so forth, it's nothing if you are not able to understand your customer and understand what these 4 Rs mean to the customers. It's like buying a new house, but you have a shiny new house, but then you don't kind of fit it with your own furnitures and renovation to the lifestyle that you need. So for us, I think one component that really worked well for us is constantly thinking about how do we structure our house, our systems in a way to allow for seamless orchestration, right? When it comes to 4 Rs, it's really about seamless orchestration. And that's not an easy problem to solve, right? Because it's very easy to get into the systems, and start building hundreds of campaigns, hundreds of automations, and then suddenly you lose control of everything. So I think some of the areas that really helped us well in terms of thinking about seamlessly orchestrating the right kind of campaigns, it's firstly to think about it from a business strategy perspective, right? So when you think about the set of campaigns that you have, and it's going to get targeted to every user, I think you got to think about, for how do I prioritize all these different campaigns for each of the user so that you can prioritize the right message to each user. So first, you think about it from a user eligibility perspective, right? Like if I'm user A, I'm going to be eligible for campaign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? The next thing we think about it is how do we prioritize each of these campaigns? Because yes, I might be eligible for them, but there's only going to be one message that's most relevant for me, right? So how do we prioritize it? And there's a lot of intelligence for that in defining, what kind of what would be the most relevant message for that user at that moment in time. And of course, marrying it to the priorities of the business, right? Like what are the key business objectives that we need that the business needs, and that can be served to the user as well. So I think thinking about it along this eligibility and prioritization bucket helps us to design and structure our system in a way that we might have campaign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but over time they're going to have like campaign 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and more use cases coming in, and they're going to come in additively. And there's no way that your user is going to have the appetite to consume 10 campaigns at one go, right? So how do we then prioritize? How do we build a mechanism? How do we first define what is the priority to each user? And after which, build a structure so that as more and more campaigns come in, be able to prioritize the key campaigns, the campaign that we want the user to understand, to receive at that moment in time. Right, so that is at least one way that I think has been really useful. Of course, that's on the orchestration, on the prioritization side of things. But there's a lot more components when it comes to designing systems. Scalability is one principle that we constantly, ensure that everything we build is not just for a singular use case. We think about it, what will it look like 5 years down the road, and make sure that it's scalable. So things like, creating dynamic modules within your system. So for example, every content, right, instead of creating content from a blank slate, I have them in modules, right? Because there are some parts that's bound to be reusable. There's always your header and footer that is in an email that is reused across every single campaign. But maybe the body is tailored, is customized. There's going to be some segments that you're going to build out all the time, right? Maybe it's based on email deliverability, based on email subscription kind of criteria. So those kind of reusable components, best is to modularize it. Yeah, so there are a lot of these principles that we think about when it comes to building the systems and the campaigns.
And I think from there, right, I think you shared a lot about how these things can come together very nicely. And the part that I think is very important is then how then do you link it back to the customer, right? I mean, as with everything, you always want to start from the customer. So really having these right mechanisms to get there. On a very simplistic sense, you can say that, all right, if you have the right intelligence to predict when you should send something to someone, that's one of the mechanisms to actually make the process of who you should send easier. The other one that you talked about was the modularity, right? How then do you ensure scalability with that? How then do you make sure that you can make it easy to maximize the so-called level of personalization for each customer, right? So I think that that's where, as you build more and more of these so-called mechanisms or levers over time, that's where you can increase your ability to serve the customer. But if you don't start from the customer on what's the experience and hypothesis you wanted to do, then you might not build towards your objective. Let's take the very simple example, right, of just email headers and footers. Right. So for us, yes, it could be relatively generic. For a lot of companies, it's like relatively generic. But why do we want to build it in a modular sense? We want to build it in a modular sense because we understand that, there are people who might want to see different things at different point of time. There are, now even more categories than before. So we wanted to make sure that we set up the systems at the back to be able to be ready for us to play around with these elements to enable the marketers to actually, personalize the content that we show, even in terms of just the layout of what categories or what brands we want to feature. And I think that sort of thinking, that sort of mechanisms help play a big role in terms of enablement, and not just in terms of if you can predict who it wants to receive what, but if you don't have a system to deliver it, then you kind of limit yourself because usually when we talk about one-to-one personalization or hyper-personalization, these are things that you need to design and approach to ensure that it's really, really scalable. And not to gloss over this component, right? But I think that the next section of having the right execution becomes so important because of all these things, right? You could design, you could do this, you could do that, but at the end of the day, without high quality execution, these are things that, especially when it comes to major events, right, can become a huge opportunity that is lost and it's very hard to recoup, right? One day lost, it's not something that you can get back easily. You have to perform 10 times better on other days, in order to really recoup that loss of zero impact. So I think that's a very important concept to keep executional and operational levels at a very, very high level. And this is something that actually has many areas, right? It's one thing to say, yeah, make sure there's no mistakes, but there are actually many people, many components in order to ensure that we focus on quality execution and delivery as a whole. Maybe Jarrett, what you can share as well is just looking at the systems, right? I mean, if something is down, I can't send anything out. No emails and no push notifications are going to go down. So what are some basic things that you have to make sure is, at 100% or 99.99% throughout the year in order to always deliver that success? Because you can say, yeah, it's only going to break down once a year, but you don't want it to break down on your biggest day ever.
Yeah, definitely. So I think preventive is better than reacting. Um, when it comes to prevention, we have very stringent kind of monitoring SLAs, both internally within our organization for the different teams that's supporting us in this overall architecture, as well as externally, right, with the vendors, where certain parts are processed, it's reliant on the vendors. So I think there's two main parts, two main components of this architecture that we really make sure that there's going to be high operationality. One is, of course, the systems uptime. So making sure that, when we trigger an API, the endpoint is able to ingest that and act upon that to trigger downstream to the next part of the process. And making sure, just overall, because it's a connection of 3 or 4 big systems in this whole delivery process. It's about really making sure that each of these systems have 99% uptime. I don't think that we can have any leeway out of 99%. Right. The second component of this architecture is the data infrastructure, right? So you have all your fast data that's coming, or the customer actions and events that's flowing into your systems, and you have your slow data as well that's aggregated in micro batches or in once a day kind of batches, pushed into all these systems. You got to make sure that that data pipeline is also a very high level of operationality. And as soon as there's any issues with any part of the pipeline, I think we bring into investigative measures, and of course find the right patch and fixes for it. But I think what's important to take note as well is that rather than relying on a single stream, I think it might make sense to really diversify and de-risk into multiple streams, right? So, for example, if you have a channel that serves, say, push notifications, and say that that channel is bound to be down on certain key, not bound to be down, sorry, at risk of being down at certain key seasons, maybe it's important to have certain failovers, right? So, do you have other potential systems that you can fail over to? If not, what's your failover strategy, right? Because it could be a strategic call to say, okay, this channel is down, let's fail over to, say, email or say any other channels like SMS, right? And I think that that SOP, that ability to react to the situation, of course, is important to have a good SOP to govern it, right? And so that when a crunch time comes, when a situation arises, everyone in the role knows what to do and what's the right step to take. So prevention is better than reaction. So firstly, have very high and strict monitoring SLAs, but also be prepared if crunch time comes and with the relevant failovers and the relevant SOPs in place. I think that's the way that we think about it.
Yep. And I think that there will be a point whereby, of course, there's going to be a trade-off, right? You can pour in 2000% of your effort into ensuring that there is as little breakdown as possible, but that probably wouldn't be an effective use of resources. Tasks like, Jarrett was alluding to, the right SOP, the right people, the right processes on reacting to problems fast, right? I think that's very important. The systems, the things that you build up can help you shorten the time for a lot of things, right? But it can't prevent the whole myriad of problems, especially when you're dealing with things that change extremely fast. I mean, the OS for Android and iOS just change all the time, right? The APIs, change all the time. There's so many things that can change all the time. So what's really important is then having the right approach, that fits your culture, fits your organization, fits your team, right? The right mentality. If it's a point whereby you need high testing, need a high level of, say, speed, or is it something that you need a high level of accuracy, or what is it? So that as you design the process, it needs to be deliberate so that you can best utilize the structure that you have set up, right? And if there's anything that we've seen be very powerful, is embracing new ideas for execution based off these mechanisms and infrastructures that we talked about today. Because I think that there is a huge myriad of possibilities when it comes to utilization of the tools that come and go. But most importantly, you don't know what your customer is going to engage with, but also you can make good guesses. And that's where you really empower your teams, especially the ones who are meant to drive the creative component, the content component, to be well enabled to engage with your customer. Right. So let me just use an example, right? I wanted to use an application-based example to really kind of showcase this. So you may want to apply something such as a predictive tool, right? On like, okay, what's the best content for my customer today, right? And the truth to this is every vendor and technology or tool will exist for a reason, right? And it will be something that is more geared towards. You really need to see if it fits your current gaps. And that's where we talked about the structure earlier, the system of records, intelligence, and engagement. You need to see if it fits your gaps and not just do something just because it's new, right? You need to embrace it, but also base it off, hey, is this something that will be useful to us right now? If you try and be predictive, but you do not have a really solid system of record, you have outdated data, then we like to call this garbage in, garbage out, rubbish in, rubbish out, or whichever term you use for trash, right? And I think that that's a really fundamental thing, right? You really need to be disciplined in saying, okay, as much as I want to do these things that are exciting, the most important thing is I solve this thing first, right? Or this is the thing that I need to focus on first, either to get the right solution or to get a solution that it's a step improvement, a working solution of it. So if let's say now your data is only 50% accurate, then okay, instead of worrying about it being 50% accurate, can I extract 50% of the people with 100% accuracy? Or like, can I identify which ones are accurate? And let's work off those. Because then for the rest, which are inaccurate, then you take a different approach rather than, come up with a predictive tool that solves for everything, which would then be, an idea that after that, when you test, oh, it does well, it doesn't do well. You have no idea why, because the fundamentals of it are compromised. So I think that, there's so many ideas going around these days to utilize the technologies, the tools at hand, the different channels people are engaging with. But more and more so, you see that, yes, use tools and technology to make operations more effective, more efficient, more intelligent, right? Then you start to see components of decision making being automated because you can train machines, right, with very specific purposes, and then you can understand, how is it useful. Then these are things whereby it actually increases the number of things you can make possible for any given day. Because in the past, if you wanted an extremely well-crafted, say, 11/11 sale, you got to go so much into the data, you got to look at so many things, and a lot of work needs to go into it, right? Which is super important. But if you're able to cut out a lot of the work behind, extracting data, analyzing it, because you have these systems built up already, all the more you can ensure that every single event you capture the opportunity because you are taking away resource constraint. But B, ensure that you keep improving the quality of every single event, shopping season that you run. So, all in all, we've talked about quite a few different components over here, but we could go on forever on this. I think the biggest message that we want to take away, or rather we want you to take away, is that with e-tailers, the one thing that we've embraced is the utilization of data. The one problem that we have learned to overcome is that there is so much data, right? And it's very hard to manage. And you also can't change up your systems like every other day, right? That sort of overhaul is a huge investment. It takes a huge amount of time. But most importantly, we feel that, approach the problem with some structure, with some clarity, then you'll be able to cut through the noise of the market, the noise of the data, and really understand, okay, no, this is the key thing I want to solve. And therefore, if I solve it at this speed, this will make me one step closer or one step faster to where I want to be. And that thing being the pursuit of higher and higher customer engagement, you will never get there, right? That's practically speaking, because people take things for granted, right? I mean, that's a very human behavior. And I think that expectations always rise. And that's the key thing. So if expectations are always rising, you've got to make sure that you keep improving, you keep changing, and that the things that you try out, the next step improvement that you do will help you meet that demand, or even wow the customer. You shouldn't just be aiming to meet, right? You really want to take that step up and be a cut above the rest, and then move to another area, do that again. Because if you don't, the moment you hit expectations, the next moment you're just going to dip because expectations have risen again. So you always want to be exceeding. You want to be the one pushing the curve of expectations. So with that, we hope that we've given you something valuable today. Hopefully in future we might be talking more about this topic, other relevant topics. We could go on about how can you best engage in that 4 Rs, right? And most importantly, I think understand your motivation behind it. Like for us, it's really we want to bring joy to the customer, and that's why this motivates us to do what we do, right? Because a lot of what we do with you is empowering, and I think at that part, that human component underlying a lot of this is not something to be understated, right? So maybe it's about that reflection first. Hey, what's my mission? It's not just something lofty to put over there. It's something that really speaks to, hey, this is the reason why I do this. So I'm not sure, like from this point on, Jarrett, anything before we, hand it back to Chris?
Maybe I just want to do one last shout out for organizations who are considering transforming or bringing their systems to the next level. I think one common pitfall that a lot of organizations do is that a lot of organizations go through is to additively develop their engagement stack, their CRM systems, right? What do I mean by additively develop it is when you have one use case, you develop something that's very bespoke to that use case, and you keep adding that on. And over time, you build this thing called technical debt, right? Because you have built so many things and there's no elegant way to manage all of these different pipelines that you have built. So what really helps sometimes, instead of just brute forcing your way to the next use case, is to take a step back, right, and think about after maybe once every 5 years, think about it, look at the overall stack, look at where the market is today and what the capabilities is available out there, and then you start doing this audit, right, and you realize that actually, if you didn't brute force your way through and you completely change the paradigm, meaning change your systems that you are working off from, I think it unlocks a lot of possibilities that that maybe the team has been struggling with and has been investing a lot of time when it could be a lot more enabled in a lot more easily, right? So long story short, don't always brute force, but don't always build things additively, but once in a while, once every 5 years, take a step back and audit the engagement stack. It would surprise you how much possibilities it can bring. That's my final takeaway that I want to shout out to.
Thank you so much, Zhiliang and Jarrett. I think a lot of information has been given this afternoon. I think, but the thing is, it's only a very it's a glimpse of what you do and what CRM actually covers across the marketing funnel for ZALORA. But key takeaways from my side will always be that CRM at first looks very process oriented, and it is process oriented, and that's why I think there's a lot of need for people to actually realize that it's not just a click of the button whenever they send something to you. There's actually a thought process behind why you're receiving such notifications. But more importantly, I think when it comes to CRM and the process that they go through, it's always going to be a combination of talent and technology. So the person behind the keyboard and the technology and the data and all of this, the technological stack that they have, are all working together in order for us to get the desired result. Because in the end, what the guys are doing day in, day out is really think about the customer and what exactly do they want to see from their experience with ZALORA. And that always going to be a very important factor and in keeping you guys entertained and informed about what you like and what you love about ZALORA. So thank you so much for that overview. And I think if you do have questions, guys, we will be uploading this video again on LinkedIn. You can actually share those questions on the LinkedIn post, and then we'll try to respond to the questions that you've sent there. But if you do have any other information that you want, we'll probably have another LinkedIn live session soon about CRM and what they do, probably closer to a big sales period, because that's when it gets a little bit more exciting. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you did get something from the session. And this session will still be uploaded on YouTube, and as mentioned, will be on our LinkedIn page. So thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Bye.